and trade restrictions. Ambassador 𝐂𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐚'𝐬 will take the lead. Thank you.
Well, welcome back everyone. This last session of the day. There's a special panel on China's technological advances and potential areas of future trade restrictive measures. Theme we have been exploring since yesterday. I've been part of several editions of AICCS earlier, but I must say that 18th AICCS is taking its special theme very seriously, and that's how it should be. In fact, there was a session on the theme of the special theme. In our panel, we have very strong cast led by Convenor himself, Venkat, as speaker, which means that he will not be able to step in and apply the guillotine. He will speak on the theme of China's disruption of tech value chains. Then we have Dr. Pranay Kotasthane of Takshashila institution. Pranay, he follows technology space in China very, very closely, and I follow his writings very closely. He'll be speaking on foundational factors behind China's tech trajectory. And we have Dr. Antara Ghoshal Singh of ORF. Now, Antara's strong suit is meticulous tracking of Chinese language media, especially what appears in mainland China and what it has to say about India, about issues of interest to us. And not surprisingly, she'll speak on Chinese domestic discourse on geopolitics of technology. Now, we have been discussing some of these themes since yesterday. In fact, in my remarks at the inaugural session, I also dwelt on some aspects of China's innovation story, how impressive it has been, and yet kind of limitations it suffers from. We discussed a term which has appeared again and again, tech obsession of Xi Jinping, and how China is poised to dominate future industries. And this is one aspect perhaps we can explore a little bit more here. This whole talk about China Shock 2.0, China Shock 1.0 being what happened soon after China joined WTO, and the way it dominated traditional labor-intensive industry and global marketplace for those products. Now that is being replicated with China's ascendancy in high-tech, green and strategic industries, what they call three new, solar panels, electric vehicles, lithium-ion batteries, but it's not limited to that. Next wave is going to be AI applications because they are putting in a lot of resources there. So they are flooding global markets, and frankly, both developed countries and emerging market economies like India, we are struggling to see how China doesn't sort of suck oxygen out of the system. So this is for developed economies, it's a strategic erosion in sectors they had dominated or expected to dominate. So all this talk about resilient supply chain, But on the other hand, views in developing countries more ambivalent because green energy transition is facilitated by the fact that China is offering these products at extremely competitive prices. What we are achieving in solar sector or wind energy wouldn't have been possible. Yet, creating domestic capabilities is becoming very challenging. So pushback is intensifying, and how it shapes up, we'll be discussing that. I will not take too much of time here. Let me just repeat the format we have been following. Three speakers will get about 10 minutes each. I think there is someone has a bell, so please go ahead and troll them. Then we'll have a sort of moderated conversation. I'll be posing just one question to each of them, and we'd like to keep enough time for the questions from audience, because this has been one comment, one rather sort of criticism, I'll not say criticism, but complaint that sometimes there's not enough time for Q&A from audience. So Venkat, we'll start with you. So over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I thank Ambassador 𝐂𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐚'𝐬 for suggesting that I also be a part of this panel. This panel's idea was, totally his brainchild, and he also took the initiative of not only conceptualizing this whole panel, but also suggesting that who all should be the panelists. So I am one of those guys whom he thought that I can do some justice, but let's see how far I can live up to the task. Fortunately, Chinese government has made it a bit easy for me, because this 9th of October, they have come up with this major initiative or policy of strangling the rest of the world when it comes to export of rare earth elements and rare earth materials. Well, China did it first time in 2010 during a dispute with Japan. And again, this year, May and June, China did restrict certain exports to Western firms as a result of the tariffs imposed by Clinton administration, by the Trump administration. But, it was in 1992, let me go back to history a bit. It was in 1992 that Deng Xiaoping first announced the country's desire to turn rare earths into what he called, quote-unquote, oil of China. In fact, till late 20th century, it was United States which was leading when it comes to production of rare earth materials. In the mid-1990s, due to the deregulation of global trade that led to permissive investment screening, a tolerance of offshoring, the U.S. Committee for Investment in U.S. under Clinton administration approved GM's sales of a firm called 𝐸, which used to manufacture magnets. It was an Indiana-based firm that manufactured rare earth magnets used in computer hard drives, jet guidance systems and it was whole this 𝐸 was sold to Chinese owners with close ties to Beijing. Allegedly, one of the owners happened to be son-in-law of Deng Xiaoping. That's the grapevine that time. And later it was revealed by one of the American policy makers that these magnets had a dual use, and they were also useful for cruise missile technology. And when the Indiana firm was sold to these Chinese owners, the condition was that the firm would continue to operate in Indiana. But strangely, after a few years, the Indiana firm was shut down and all the equipment of 𝐸 was exported to China. And then the George Bush Jr. administration came. They were a section of them was perhaps very busy basking in the glory of making initiatives to socialize China into the international liberal order. And another major section was so much sucked into this great war on terror that China, managed to do things in its own way, and it has become the giant that it is today when it comes to the rare earth materials. So China dominates rare earth, materials. 90% of the world's supply chain is, in the hands of China in terms of production, refining, and exporting. More than 90% of magnet manufacturing is in, again, hands of China. Now, this month, October 9, 2025, as many of you know, the China's Ministry of Commerce added 5 rare earth elements to its control list on top of 7 that's already there on the list in April. The newly added materials have military applications such as laser technology. Laser technology is to a significant extent comprises of an element called europium, which is again used in TV and smartphone screens. The ministry said that various types of rare earth productions and processing equipments will now be subjected to export controls, and they are going to discuss and deliberate on various other matters, equipment materials like high density lithium ion batteries, cathode and anode materials which are used to make them. So a number of new rules have been unveiled, prohibiting unauthorized export of technology related to rare earth mining, processing and magnet manufacturing. One of the interesting requirements is anyone making product overseas with certain Chinese inputs will also need to apply for an export license to sell them to a third country. This is quite similar to the CHIPS Act, where the Biden administration came up with this CHIPS Act, and they said that applied the point of origin rule by saying that if ASML has to a firm like ASML, if it has to export chip making equipment, the hardware, to China, then it can do only on the condition that 100% of its equipment has to be non-US components. Even if you have an iota of American component in whatever ASML is doing, then it needs to take a license from the Department of Commerce in the United States. So this is also somewhat similar to that. CHIPS Act also said that if an American is working for a Chinese semiconductor firm or chip making firm, then he needs to take the permission of the Department of Commerce. So the chips, this new rare earth kind of a ban that has come about with China weaponizing its strengths to strangle rest of the world, just like Americans have used to strangle China, choke China with supply of chips to hurt the semiconductor industry. But the steps taken by United States, 3-4 years back, it hit Huawei initially big time, but Huawei has recovered. That's the nature of the beast. That Huawei, encouraged by state and investment and R&D, it has been able to make up to a certain extent, whereby it has launched certain advanced 5G model mobile phones with more or less zero presence of American chips. But if the Chinese are successful in implementing, whatever they are doing in the case of rare earth, it's not going to be easy for the Americans, or for that matter the rest of the world, to make up for that in a very short span of time. So the American policymakers did realize that they are going to have a tough time. They realized that the Chinese are going to perhaps weaponize in the future. So 2012 they have reopened their facility. One particular facility where this rare earth material mining and all that was being done. This is in a place called Mountain Pass in California. It was opened in 1952, but environmental standards, lower productivity, lack of support for industrial policy in the United States, all these things led to its closure in 2002. But once they have opened it up in 2012, the United States doesn't have the domestic refining capacity, and now it was forced to compel to ship their raw materials to China for processing. And now the story is that China has completely leveraged the critical minerals, and it has used this particular expertise of which it has developed by after so much of investment. It has used it in a very shrewd manner, as it has done in other cases, by spending a lot and subsidizing certain firms. So to complete state control of production and extraction, cheap loans, export limits to, having policies which limit exports to bring majority of the world's critical mineral industry under its domination. So that's where we stand when it comes to China's disruption of this rare earth elements and rare earth materials. So I don't know how much time I have, but maybe I would like to respond to some of the questions that might be raised. But for now, I would stop here.
Thanks, Venkat, for setting the ball rolling. I'm sure there are a lot of questions we'll have to respond to later. Now I'll request Pranay to make his presentation.
Wansheng Hao, don't correct my Mandarin tones, please. First, a disclaimer that this is a technology policy analyst view of China, what China is doing on tech, rather than a sinologist's view on technology. So please pardon, and I'll be very happy to update some of the priors, given that China experts are all here. Okay, so let me talk about what, there are three main arguments that I want to make, and I'll say them right up front. One, that China's tech success rests on several foundational factors and which are aided by specific policy instruments. Okay? So one can't exist without the other. So we'll talk about what those foundational factors are. Second, some of these foundational factors are at a severe risk of being declining over the last few years, and I'll explain why that is the case. And that's why I say a linear projection of China's tech successes over the next decade, based on what it has done in this decade, is a wrong model, and I'll explain why. And third, I would like to disagree with Venkat here. I think China's tech restrictions, which have come up, they come from a position of weakness and not strength, and I'll explain why. I think only one country can make China plus one a reality, and that country is China, and it is doing so. Now let me explain what on the foundational factors first. So is China an innovation powerhouse? We've discussed a lot of those, but I'll just give a few stats. So 10th in the Global Innovation Index in 2025. It's not the top 5, but 10th is a respectable number. It's the only middle income country in the top 30. So that's a significant achievement. Highest number of S&T clusters, and as Professor Ramakrishna mentioned in the morning, it is still dependent on many materials still. So semiconductors, software, industrial ball bearings which are used in windmills, etc., they are also dependent on it from German players. So a lot of those dependencies don't get mentioned in the case of China as they get mentioned in the case of US or other countries, but these are global supply chains. No one country is Atmanirbhar. Now, the second point, how did China get here, right? So what are the three common explanations which are given? So the three common explanations we often hear is forced technology transfer, the trade markets for technology. That did play a role, but I mean all countries try to do that. The real element is you also need to have the capacity to absorb those technologies, right? And that is something which needs to be developed. It's not like a file that you can copy and then that file you can reuse. You need to have that absorptive capability. So that doesn't explain everything. Industrial espionage and theft is the second explanation. It has played a role, but it can't explain successes across many of the sectors. And third is state-run firms. Again, most successes actually on innovation have come out of non-state firms, even if they have been backed by government financing. So Huawei, Moonshot, AI, DeepSeek, or many of such examples. So then what are the real factors, right? What are the foundational factors? In my view, based on analyzing technology ecosystems of many countries, I think the three foundational factors that work in China's favor are: one, high investment in capabilities and infrastructure, and high educational attainment has been a really big factor that we often underplay. In fact, there is a great paper by Nitin Bharti and all, which has looked at a century of education policies in India and China, and they find that even before the communist period, China invested a lot in primary education, then secondary and tertiary, and that built the foundations of a lot of things that happened later. Second is reforms in the S&T ecosystem. So earlier, like India, China also had this elite R&D institutions which were walled off from universities, but that changed and a lot of focus has happened on university research, which is a big change. And if you look at the R&D figures, even though the gross expenditure on R&D is consistently over 2%, 70% of it is business R&D, not government R&D. Right? So that is another important factor which has happened over time. The second foundational factor is state focus and local level experimentation. I think this, so bureaucratic decentralization is Venkat's PhD topic, I got to know, is actually also one key factor, because different cities experimented with different things, right? And that was an important factor in trying to get, so the direction came from top, like 𝐻 SAMI model, selective authoritarian, mobilization, innovation, but even though the direction was top, there was enough flexibility for many bureaucratic state level actors to try different things, and a lot of investment has actually come from those entities, not the central government. For example, the MG Motors brand that we see is wholly owned by a fund of the Shanghai government. The second one is intensive competition, and we know that even in telecom, for example, it's Huawei's success we know, but there was intense competition between various kinds of firms. There were JVs, there was Datang, there was a lot of state-owned firms, all of them competing. That was an important thing. The third important foundational factor is global connections. So movement of talent back and forth from other countries is well known, but informal social networks play a big role in the science tech ecosystem. Right? And this is not just true of China. In the case of Taiwan, in the case of Israel, also they have played an important role. And there's a lot of study about how Chinese American researchers do an order of magnitude higher research collaborating with Chinese researchers back home than, say, Indian Americans doing research with Indian. So these kinds of things are important. And of course, all this happened because there was favorable geopolitics. Right? That was the underlying tissue for all this. Now, on this layer of foundational factors, there was many specific government policies that we all have heard about. There are seed investment, government guidance fund, there are spin-offs which happened, there are stealing, like legal, illegal, quasi-legal methods were used. So all those, I think, played a cameo role, but they can't explain a lot of the things that are happening through the foundational factors. So this is how my explanation would be for what China has been able to achieve or not achieve. Now, what has happened in the last decade? Right? So my argument is that many of these foundational factors have declined and are not the same as they were until now. Now let me explain why. Number one, more centralized control. So as I said, the bureaucratic decentralization idea, that has now changed to this desire for self-sufficiency. That is leading local governments to do the same things that many other local governments are trying without the market-based comparative advantage idea that played to some extent earlier. So you're seeing a lot of, every province wants a fab, and all those fabs, you can build them up, but fab finally will be profitable once you have enough demand for it, right? And that is really something which is, you will see a lot of money going into the same projects which many other cities are also trying. Second related point is that there is enough data on this as well. So let me just give that firms producing chips and electric vehicles, for example, firms that are producing chips for electric vehicles are 30% costlier. Those chips cost 30% costlier. So there's no cost advantage like it was in the case of many other equipment, and yet they are doing that because that's the directive. So this is something to keep in mind. Third is that CPC has always been wary of alternative power structures, and we know of the restrictions that happened on Chinese companies in the private sector, and that leads to reconsideration of the investment that you will do in the future. The second big change that has happened is change geopolitical perceptions, right? The West or many other countries are not going to allow what China did to it until now, right? So China has also used its SAMR, the state administration for market regulation, oftentimes, and that is causing pushback in other countries as well. There are negative perceptions due to export controls, and in fact, things like in the Chips and Science Act, there is a clear directive that universities in the US which have Confucius institutes won't be eligible for that funding. Right? Those are kinds of examples which indicate that the world is not going to be as benign to China as it was until now. The third important point is private sector concerns itself. The Economist data suggests that there's 30% of industrial firms who are loss-making by June 2024. That's the highest number since the Asian financial crisis of 1998. Right? So these do have real consequences. And finally, local government fiscal stress also will have an impact on the technological investments that can be done. So based on these kinds of factors, my assessment is that these escalating geopolitical tensions always lead to something that politics of innovation literature calls as creative insecurity. So you always try to get some things around, try to innovate. So you will see some creative insecurity in the short term. In fact, that's what we are seeing now. But it doesn't mean that you can linearly project that into the future. So my contention is, and it is open for debate, that it's not to say that China will suddenly decline on the tech side or submit to external pressures, but I see that it won't be able to do a lot of things that the West still holds power on. Okay. So this is the contention. Now, since I have 1 minute, I will also address quickly on the restrictions that China has brought in, just to address that. I think they are significantly different from what restrictions like ASML, etc. would have. In terms, in the mechanics they are similar, but in terms of impact they are very different, because it's very difficult to make an alternate EUV machine, but it's not that difficult to do things on the rare earths. Let me give some numbers, right? So, and these are cards which you once play, you extinguish the value, right? So others will try to find. Give me some stats. Total US market for rare earths last year was $170 million. That's the size of their avocado market, right? That's all. Then if you see in a particular EV, two-wheeler EV, for example, Ather's CEO is on record saying that the amount of rare earth required in an Ather EV, one EV of 70,000, is around 200 rupees. That's all. So even if that price increases 2x, 3x, 4x, they can do an alternate production, right? Mining will take time, but you can do many other substitutions. So there are substitutions on process to material side. There are substitutions which can happen system to system side. For example, Tesla has been experimenting with induction motors. Toyota and European suppliers have also reduced the number of half the heavy rare earths are replaced with lanthanum and cerium, which are more abundant, right? So these kinds of things are going to happen, and because of these restrictions, China has made clear that this will happen in the future, and many other countries will do. So the biggest innovation will not come by you building a rare earth industry, that will happen over time, but you finding other substitutes which will either reduce the amount of rare earth consumption or use alternative motors, alternative magnets, and already people are two-wheelers, etc. are talking about it. And finally, the point is that if just like what DeepSeek could do, there are similar things can happen in the rest of the world as well, especially in something like rare earths. If you see the export controls, they're so broad. That suggests to me that they haven't found a precise instrument like EUV. You have restricted just one kind of machine. It's very broad. Things, everything from metal smelting to diamond wire cutters are there in it, which to me indicates that they are experimenting with this and seeing where it goes. And to me that indicates weakness rather than strength. So this is my overall assessment, that there will be creative insecurity is leading to some innovations, but I wouldn't project that into the future because the winds that benefited China thus far have changed significantly. Thank you.
Thanks, Pranay. I think that's a very important observation you made, that winds that benefited China in the past, those winds have changed. So the future trajectory of China's high-tech quest might be more challenging. Well, now we move to Antara.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to be a part of this important panel discussion. Also, I would like to highlight that this is my first time at AICCS, so it's a very special occasion to me. I hope my research findings will add value to the conversations that has been happening since the last 2 days at this prestigious platform, and which I believe also plays a very important role in shaping India's China discourse. So before I start my presentation, just a brief background to the kind of work I do. Ambassador Sir has already mentioned about it, but just briefly, I generally look at I do discourse analysis by scanning Chinese media, Chinese think tank publications, scholarly works, and so on and so forth. And then I try to understand the broader public sentiment in China, or the mood in China, how China is thinking on various geopolitical or geoeconomic issues, which is policy relevance to India. What I would like to do in the next 8 to 10 minutes is to give you a glimpse into the current economic debate happening in China, within China's scholarly community, and how technology figures into it. So if you look at it, if you look at the Chinese media or Chinese social media these days, you cannot miss but see the triumphant tone that has been there lately. Many seem to believe that China is very much on its way to win the trade war against the United States. It is now escalating, retaliating, experimenting with extraterritorial trade rules, with much greater effectiveness. In other words, it is giving back to the Trump administration in terms that they understand. And behind this growing confidence of China is the strength of Made in China. Chinese exports have maintained good momentum despite the disruptions caused by the Trump tariff. China's exports grew by 7% in 2025 till September. Again, much has been written about China's massive trade surplus. Even after losing much of the US market, China's enormous global trade surplus remained unshakable. In the first 8 months of 2025, China's trade surplus in goods reached about 785 billion and is expected to exceed 1.2 trillion for the entire year. China's manufacturing now accounts for nearly 30% of the global total, and its overall scale has remained world's largest for 15 consecutive years. Make in China or Made in China has actually become the economic foundation of various countries, particularly developing countries, including India. So no doubt China has many reasons to celebrate. But then the celebration is often cut short by China's mounting concerns elsewhere, and that is its domestic economy. It is important to note that although China's manufacturing exports are performing very well globally, it remains well positioned to handle the trade barriers which has been imposed by the United States and other countries. Its trade surplus has continued to grow, and its GDP growth is also quite okay. 5% is quite okay. But the problem that the Chinese side see is that Chinese manufacturing has not been able to add the economic vitality in China's domestic economy. There is a growing consensus within China that Chinese economy is currently facing a situation never seen in the past 40 years. That the Chinese economy never truly emerged from the pandemic. And why are they saying so? Because the PPI, or the Producer Price Index, has remained negative for 3 consecutive years, declining every month. 3 years of negative PPI and more than 2 years of near zero CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. It indicates a slump unprecedented in China's 4 decades of economic development. Then there is this continuous decline in prices and pressure on corporate profits, resulting in serious involution in various key sectors of Chinese economy. Coupled with this downturn, coupled with the involution factor, there is downturn in real estate prices that began in 2021, and consumption hasn't really taken off. Then, there are factors like for FDI declining, there is risk of industrial chains moving abroad, market costs are rising, and consumption has been diminishing. And as a result of all these factors, there has been pressure building up on China's employment space. Now, the key question going around in Chinese strategic circles is why China's consumption isn't picking up despite the high-level government intervention. In case of most developing countries, when per capita GDP reaches around 13,000 to 14,000 USD, the export-driven effect is expected to weaken, and consumption becomes the driving force of the economy. However, that is not happening in China's case. Although its per capita GDP has already reached $13,000 to $14,000, most of the highways and airports that needed to be built has been built, but consumption isn't picking up. It has still not become, the 70 or 80% of Chinese GDP. It's still lagging behind. So one explanation that is also fast gaining currency within Chinese strategic circles is that Chinese government's techno-nationalism, or particularly single-minded focus on strengthening independent innovation, it has been somewhat counterproductive. It is being argued that the Chinese government has somehow pitted the development of hard technology and innovation in opposition to developing consumption, finance, and real estate. As if somebody who engages in consumption or real estate, he is hindering innovation, and that China will lose competition against the United States. But now it is being argued that, China already has a lot of technology and it is quite cutting edge, but still it is facing a lot of trouble in its domestic economy. So, which means that China cannot escape its current predicament by simply overcoming technological bottlenecks and establishing an independent domestic industrial chain. Chinese economists agree that without sufficient domestic demand, its strength in technology is proving counterproductive or meaningless. On the contrary, they say that without sufficient domestic demand, the stronger China is getting in terms of manufacturing, in terms of military, in terms of technology, the more severe the domestic economic crisis it is facing. They caution that before the Second World War, the United States held a 40% global manufacturing share, which is still higher than China's current 30%. And yet it suffered a depression unprecedented in human history. And many of Chinese scholars believe that somewhat of that trend is happening in China's case as well. The second criticism put forward by many Chinese economists is that when it comes to boosting consumption, the Chinese government's policies so far are focusing too much on measures like subsidies and tax cuts, cash handouts, stabilizing employment, and so on and so forth, And they believe that the government is trying to avoid structural issues like something like the real estate issue. For example, it is argued that if real estate prices continue to decline, overall demand in the market will stagnate. Local governments lacking revenue will be reluctant to spend or invest, making it very difficult for the domestic demand to pick up. From that perspective, many Chinese scholars are of the opinion that de-risking or deflating the real estate bubble a few years back was actually a mistake. That the government went overboard and one size fits all kind of crackdown on the real estate market. It has hit the middle class in China, and that is one of the reasons why domestic demand has been unable to pick up. They want the government to relook at its long-held stance regarding debt expansion, particularly treating real estate as a taboo, or obsessing over real economy, that is strong technology, strong production and strong military, and shying away from expanding debt, referring to Japan's case, that Japan has lost 3 decades because of its excessive debt expansion. So this group of economists, their core proposition is that the government must stop strengthening the supply side during this period of shrinking demand, which will create more and more oversupply and drag down the economy. Instead, it should focus on finance, not manufacturing. Explore options like boosting the stock market, stabilizing housing prices, and stabilizing local government debt, or all those measures that can create money, expand domestic demand without accumulating excess capacity. In other words, rather than competing head-on with the other exporting countries where the US is trying to shift their supply chains, China, they say, needs to change the battlefield and compete with the US directly for the title of global client by forcefully expanding its own debt. That the US's current global dominance isn't due to its vast manufacturing capabilities, but rather its monopoly on the global debt. So China should also emulate this kind of a system. And yes, there have been also, such discussions, these kind of discussions which talks about a 180-degree policy reversal.
We'll have to
Yes, just 1 minute, I'm just finishing off. Or a course correction by Chinese prominent economists. It is creating a lot of confusion within common Chinese citizens. And overall, there have been, a lot of confusion about where Chinese domestic economy is headed, and a lot of, losing confidence on how China's domestic economy is going to fare in days to come. In India, we must take a greater effort to understand the transition that is underway in the world's second largest economy. We need to be careful neither to blindly accept the China is winning narrative, nor to underestimate the resilience of the Chinese economy or the efficiency or the quick turnaround factor in the Chinese system. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Antara, for in a way showing mirror to some of the very critical domestic discourse that is taking place in China. In fact, this is something people don't quite readily appreciate, that diversity of voices which emanate from China, not just in social media, but in formal academic discussions. This is in India, and more so in West, they think that that kind of diversity is suppressed, which is not the case really. Well, now what we'll do is we have managed time quite all right so far. So we will now turn to our panelists. I have some questions for them before we open the floor for discussion. I will start with Venkat. And Venkat, I'll move away a little bit from thrust of your presentation, because I know that your scholarship goes well beyond that. In China, the focus on innovation and multi-civil fusion, something we haven't talked, but it's a very important part of the strategy, is really not new. And even during excesses of Mao period, when it comes to strategic R&D, there was focus on that, and the best example was 2 bombs, 1 satellite program, which was successfully executed, partly during the height of Cultural Revolution. So they have this tradition of marshalling, resources. Xi Jinping has taken it to a different level. Among the foundational factors that I mentioned, I would like you to explore on one additional factor which he alluded to, which is a strategic factor. That this very clear recognition in China need to be self-reliant, need to develop innovation as a key driver of growth, as an alternative and an additional driver of growth. This is one question I would like you to explore, because this will show certain continuity. Even when they're facing headwinds, they will not change direction so easily, because this is really a strategic assessment on part of Chinese leadership. Second, question I'll request you to assess what is the scorecard of China's innovation drive after all the huge investment which has been made, all what I referred to, changes that have taken place, and I'm just referring to 2 metrics, otherwise it could become too broad. One, to what extent innovation has emerged as an efficient driver of economic growth. Mantra referred to real estate bubble being popped and kind of problems that generated. That happened quite recently, 2021 in fact. To what extent innovation has stepped in as an alternative? And second, to what extent innovation has contributed to productivity? Because on that there's a lot of literature suggesting that perhaps China's scorecard is not very impressive, but I would like you to comment on that. So we'll start with you, then we'll come back to others.
I'd like to address the second question first. Assessing the scorecard of the Chinese drive for innovation, where innovation has been, Chuangxin has been the buzzword ever since Xi Jinping has come. I mean, earlier also they used to focus on that word, but under Xi Jinping, made in China, 2025. The 14th five-year plan, the socialist modernization drive, and now the 15th five-year plan is going to come. It has been elevated to another level. To what extent innovation as a factor of economic growth? I think under Xi Jinping, the century of humiliation, that political angle has perhaps been very, very instrumental in projecting China, and I think that is also political in the sense that when Xi Jinping came, the party was going through a certain kind of legitimacy crisis, and the harmonious society, call of 18ᵗʰ did not yield the desirable results, and after the 2008 the subprime crisis, when China pumped big time money, I think 3 trillion RMB, if I'm not wrong, to revive the economy, and their shift from export promotion growth strategy to boosting domestic consumption strategy. It led to a certain kind of further issues like corruption, overproduction, and then that was followed by a new normal policy where Xi Jinping said that not more than 6.5% growth rate, anti-corruption. So party was actually going through a legitimacy crisis, and so therefore it was very important for the party to regain the trust of the people, and so therefore and the new normal meant that shutting off of plants, unemployment, and then the Belt and Road Initiative came up. China Dream was another way in which the whole narrative can be sold to the domestic audience to win back the trust of the Chinese. So therefore it was very important. And then Century of Humiliation was another platform through which the domestic audience can be wooed back to the party's fold. So therefore, and when Trump came, the trade wars and supply chain disruption, all these things, and then followed by COVID, I think all this necessitated a certain kind of an initiative, and the Evergrande crisis did not help matters. And when there was a choke of chip supply, that is when I think Xi Jinping decided that China needs to factor in self-reliance, and I think previous crisis of real estates, whenever it happened, the government was able to revive that, and when Evergrande happened, the expectation was that government will again step in, but that did not happen. And I think the government realized that the money that was till then used to revitalize the Chinese economy by trying to rescue the real estate, that model is unsustainable. And given that this choking of chip supply was there, Xi Jinping, I think, decided to say that now we are going to divert that money for our tech self-reliance. And that tech self-reliance coincided, all this coincided with COVID. There was a significant dent to the Chinese economy prospects, and it has not come out of that even now. So therefore, I think many people say that Chinese economy is slowing down, there is a policy failure, but then there are a section of people who are also saying that given that it's a communist country and the Xi Jinping leadership keeps on harping this, that the Chinese are used to, take a lot of pain, unlike the Americans, and all that narrative is sold. So to a certain extent, I think the leadership is expecting the Chinese to go through this pain, and they are selling it by saying that it's all for the larger cause, to see to it that the Chinese people are triumphant at the end, and by 2049 we are going to be the numero uno and win the 100-year war. So I think that's where the whole thing is. To what extent it can contribute to economic productivity? To a certain extent they have been successful, but then most of the people have the data, they talk about how they've been successful, but I would like to talk about certain 2-3 failures of the system, whereby too much of money has been pumped and the results have not been as desirable as the leadership has expected it to be. So for example, many of the, what is that called, tech parks, for example, have been built, and in many of the localities, provincial governments have been using these tech parks to boost their exports, which is more conducive to their own interests, given the stranglehold that has taken place because of the changing nature of center-province relations. And they are not having the opportunity now to get more money through the through the promotion of real estate. So there is so these tech parks and are working at cross purpose, for example, one. Number two, there have been cases whereby some of the leading scientific and technological institutions led by very senior scientists, there's a lot of money that has gone in, and in many cases it was observed that the money that was pouring in, the accountability was not very high as much as it was desired, and some of this money has been actually pumped to private institutions to channelize that kind of a research which is not conducive to China's national interests or the way the government wanted it to be. So therefore, the proportion of success has not been as high as the government wanted it to be, and that has also led to anti-corruption charges against many of the scientists and the science and tech community. So to cut the story short, I've just given 2 examples. I can go on and on, but given the amount of investment that has happened, definitely the results have not been to the desirable extent. So I'll stop here.
There's one more question, but time permitting, we'll come back to it later. Pranay, no, we can move on to you. You referred to, both Venkat and you referred to export control measures which have been taken by China, reference to what happened in 2010, rare earths, denial to Japan. But what we are witnessing today, not just beginning 9th October, but beginning export control law of 2020, is something fundamentally different. They are moving away from earlier situation where export controls were largely opaque, selective, and actually they were denied. They said, no, we are not doing anything of the kind. Instead of that, they have very assiduously, meticulously put in place elaborate export control regime, to some extent mimicking what the USA has done, but in some areas going beyond that. In fact, one can argue that what they announced on 7 announcements of 9th October, traceability clause which is there is more stringent compared to foreign direct product rules USA had, because now it's talking 0.1%, which is really minuscule. So I would like you to really build on your earlier point about, very important point about headwinds. To what extent these extreme measures, and I'm using the term extreme deliberately, overreach on part of Chinese party state, what kind of pushback do you see? Number one, adding to headwinds you mentioned. Number two, building on what Antara talked about, criticism that there's excessive focus on manufacturing, but Xi Jinping is doubling down on that. He's repeatedly talking about prioritizing real economy as distinct from virtual economy, and that's the message coming in 4th plenum also, which concluded yesterday. Can world take so much more of that approach, where in terms of manufacturing value added, they're somewhere already around the 3%. How far can world tolerate? So essentially, headwinds, to what extent it will slow down, your prognosis there, and also the reverse argument that denial will sort of incentivize China to move ahead. Like NVIDIA is willing to provide H20 chips, but China doesn't want to buy now because they want to incentivize domestic suppliers. So your take on that?
Yeah, so first on the restrictions itself. So yeah, really important point that you just mentioned, the earlier restrictions were ad hoc, but these restrictions have made it clear that next time any geopolitical tensions happen, they are going to use it because it's a permanent bureaucratic structure which has been created, right? So that is a big signal to many market players itself, forget governments, that this is going to happen in the future. And that's why there is an added incentive that better create some alternatives, because this is going to happen. So that's a big change from 2010 to compared to this, that the use of this tool again is almost sure. You don't know when, but it will be used. So that changes government. And I've been hearing people and meeting people from the EV industry. One thing they often say is that earlier the demand in India or many other places wasn't much. So why take the trouble, just buy the cheap thing which is coming from China? Why do you want to do anything on innovation or find alternatives? But now that it is very clear that it is going to happen in the future, it is an incentive not just for governments, it is an incentive for any market player that your supply can get cut off in the future suddenly. So you are now incentivized to find other things. And as I said, none of the rarer restrictions that they have said are specific technologies which others don't know. It is different from an EUV machine tech that very few people will know, and it is proprietary, etc. The process is complex, yes, refining is complex, but it is not a core thing that others cannot master or don't know. So that's my point. I just want to add on the innovation drive point, because you mentioned, so just two metrics I want to say. Made in China 2025, the metrics for localization of semiconductors were 40% by 2020, 70% by 2025. 2025 numbers are 35%. That's what has been achieved. So a lot of trade is still going on between US and China on most of the semiconductors that China needs. It's just on the very high cutting edge which you have restrictions. So they still need those. On the military civil fusion point, which was a very important point, I differentiate between new tech and old tech in the sense that in many of the new tech, spin-ons are more important than spin-offs. So earlier model was a lot of cutting edge things happens in the military first, and then it diffuses into the civil society, right? That's what we call spin-offs. But last few, look at the most cutting edge chip. It is in your Apple phone. It's not in F-35, right? The cutting edge AI models were in the civil domain first, and then in the military domain. So many of the new tech domains first happen on the civil side. So MCF might not have that big a role because they rely on heavy capital investment. The only way you can recoup that capital investment is to selling to a large number of people. And defense demand is always small, so you have to be able to sell to a large number of people, probably to the world, and then recoup that money, put that into R&D. So MCF can play a role, but in some of these new tech, I don't think it can be a front driver like it was in the past.
Just one follow-up question. One had seen some signs that Trump administration is sort of weakening its earlier export control regime vis-a-vis China in his quest for a big beautiful deal. But post 9th October announcements, one suspects that there will be renewed resolve on part of USA. To what extent, you referred to what Professor Ramakrishnan had to say this morning about China's continuing the vulnerabilities. To what extent those vulnerabilities can be tapped to slow down China's innovation trajectory? What is your assessment on that?
I think Dr. Palit also mentioned in the morning that some of these kind of controls have short-term effects, but long-term effects, companies find alternates ways. But
not things like lithography,
correct, So that is the one which is really tough to replicate. So they have been trying, and the current model is that we will not make those high-end chips, but we will then string together the lower-end chips, Huawei Ascend chips, and network them in such a way that even though we don't have the best GPU, we are able to get the performance that way, right? So you don't necessarily need to make that chip itself, but you will find something. But that all takes time, right? So in specifically related to finding an alternative UV or 5 nanometer, I agree with Professor Ramakrishna's assessment. It will take 4-5 years, but they can get there, but it will take time. So it's difficult. Even in AI, right? We talk about DeepSeek, but the applied thing which came out, even though the Transformer paper came out in 2016, the first product of this was still in US, right? OpenAI came up, and then only DeepSeek. So those gaps still remain in my view.
Thanks. Andhra, no, turning to you. You talked about criticism of certain policies being pursued by Xi Jinping. One critical area where so much resources are being poured in R&D that certain more imminent requirements, both welfare needs and transition to consumer economy, that is hurting, isn't it? I mean, things like healthcare, pensions, social housing, education, measures to stabilize youth unemployment. To what extent this is getting reflected in domestic discourse? Is it a sort of marginal view, or do you see, coalescing of such criticism? To what extent it's being allowed in both, in social media discourse as well as in literature coming out of think tanks? No, not impact. This kind of allocational resources with tech obsession leading to prioritization, tech obsession leading to certain critical needs being ignored and being postponed once again.
As I just mentioned in my presentation also, there is a sharp critique of, having technology, having cutting edge technology is a very good thing that is being appreciated. But the thing that you were saying, that prioritizing single-minded focus on technology at the cost of other things, at the cost of employment and the social sector, so that is being debated and that is being questioned. This is something new, because for all these while I have been looking at the Chinese discourse on technology, and it is right that there have been complete focus on technology, that they have to be number one. I have studied in China also, and I've seen in Tsinghua how the culture is, where industry and university cooperation has been there for so long. Like I'm talking about 10, 15 years back, they were talking about industry and university collaboration working together. So there was this huge focus on technology, but that a new trend that I'm seeing off late is that is being questioned, and also in terms of you mentioned about healthcare, and you also mentioned about pension. Yes. Even some of these scholars are of the opinion that for pension, people who do not have kids should not be given pension. It's a punishment, So that is the kind of policies that are being talked about. So yes, in short, yes, technology is being appreciated, but also being questioned now.
Yeah, but there is also. You had also mentioned about great pride in the fact that China has managed to, in a way, best the USA in that is linked partly to the fact that China had prepared and created these capabilities, including in high-tech areas. So how the two coexist?
See, there's this contradiction happening. Chinese policies are doing wonderfully, when it comes at the global level, when they are dealing with other countries. But, as I mentioned in my presentation, that the made in China thing is not adding vitality to China's domestic economy. So there's this contradiction that is happening, So that is what is the talk of the town these days in China.
Well, now it's okay. Smita, you are the first to raise your hands. Please go ahead. Yeah. Someone can give her a mic.
Thank you. I have two quick questions, one for Antara and one for Professor Venkatraman. Antara, you mentioned something very intriguing, that China is now thinking of, taking over the role of the US in debt. I mean, China is basically it's reducing its buyings of US debt. So how do you propose it does that? Because, it still exports so much. How is it contemplating to do that? And Professor Venkatraman, about magnets, there was an intriguing report in an Indian paper that the Chinese had told us that they would be willing to sell us rare earth materials if we promised not to divert them to the US. Can you comment on that? Thank you.
Okay, so go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
What I meant to say is, like, there is this policy confusion that is happening. They have already taken certain policies, like popping the real estate bubble, or trying to have more consumption, but those are not having as much of effect as they were expecting. So there is these suggestions that are coming in about reverting those policies, and again having again focusing on real estate, or again what I'm trying to say is, like, going back on the policies that were there. So there is a debate that is happening how it can be done. As I told you, there is a lot of confusion right now, like how like you are confused, the same thing is happening within Chinese circles as well, like how it can be implemented. But then there are very senior people, very senior scholars recommending, going back of how it was done before. So going back on those policies, so there is confusion over there and kind of policy vacuum. And I think the more policy vacuum, the more insecurity or confusion that is there in China's domestic circle. Its policies are becoming more and more aggressive outside. So that is one way of looking at it, probably.
I think they are justified by saying that it's not something that we are weaponizing. And they said that we are going to allow certain types of rare earth elements exports and all that. But already there are lots of issues that are coming up regarding the way they are going about licensing the whole thing. So one way of saying is, okay, let the Indians apply, and then we will sit over their application. So that is one. And second is, I think, I'm just sorry. So I think that is the main thing, So how did right now, given I don't know when was the statement made? If it has been made pretty recently, then given that there has been, certain kind of warming up to each other on the India-China front, it's a diplomatic statement, and we should not be taking that very seriously.
If I could just add, Smita, 2 weeks ago there was a front page report in Economic Times suggesting that 51 applications for supply of rare earth magnets are pending. What has happened that China has put in place end-use certification requirement, which are very onerous, in some ways comparable to what Americans used to have, backed up by documentation requirement. Like end-use certification requirement includes Ministry of External Affairs giving certification. We had to accept at this point of time because need was quite desperate. But still, going by the ET story, they have not released. So they are playing hardball. Even if they release, point is not that they have released. Point is that they have created this massive pressure point. And pressure point not just on supply. After they have supplied, if utilization for a product is 0.1% is of Chinese origin, there is need to get export license from China. There is need to file further documentation on how that product is being utilized. So it's quite onerous. Well, now we'll take 2-3 questions and then I think
I just forgot to respond just one sentence. The thing is that even if they are going to say that India is can be supplied, but it won't happen just like that. The whole licensing process is going to be so complicated, and India, even if it can divulge, it would not intentionally go to divulge certain information which the Chinese are perhaps bargaining with. So that is another tactic, that extract as much of information as possible in the process of issuing license. So that is another point which many people are saying, that China is going to extract as much of information as possible from other countries on this front in the lieu of issuing licenses. So bureaucratic delay is one. They will sit over it. They will say we are going to give, but they are not going to give. And second, they are also going to sit over information which they perhaps would be asking in multiple installments. And it's going to be a bad move from the part of India to entertain such thoughts that you're going to get something.
My question is for Pranay. You talked about a certain size, 170 million, which is more or less the right number. And you also gave the example of ITA, which is saying that 270,000. Now there's a certain size to the market and there's a certain growth rate which is happening in the market. If we are talking about substitute products, substitute minerals, substitute alternatives being developed, even induction coils, there is a certain cost to the mine exploration. For induction coils, there is a certain cost to scale up the production necessary for that entire process. And how do you see that actually working with the cost structure that exists today? Because a lot of that cost structure is based on that low cost that we have today, and which is where we're getting the scale. And you're probably right in that China has plateaued to a certain extent, and we will see a drop over the coming years. But then the process of developing substitutes is going to add to the cost structure. How do you see that happening? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah.
3 questions. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Excellent presentations, must compliment all of you. Antara, both my questions are for you. Quick questions. One is that since you follow... Sorry? My first question is that since you follow the Chinese media quite closely, is there any conversation on the dual circulation strategy being included in the 15th five-year plan? Is there any hint that you have got in that regard? My second question is that there is a fairly rapid rate at which industrial robots are being pushed into the manufacturing capacity in China for enhancing productivity. What is the response to this? Is there an industrial or an academic response to this? Because this is where China is actually acting against the logic of a demographic dividend. So is there a reaction to this in the local media? Thank you.
So, adding to the earlier question asked to Pranay, so apart from the motivation and the resources China has having, it also has the first mover advantage given the weaker policy framework, the ecological tolerance level the earlier economy was having, and the lack of awareness about the technology transfer aspects, etc. So, these first mover advantage India does not have and other countries do not have. Also, there are some elements which does not have a substitute. They are of single use. They are very unique to a particular use. So how can you say that it is very easy to innovate and for other country?
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tharema, Triple CS. Venkat sir, about what you mentioned about the government's claim that the people can take the pain of economic slowdown, or how confident the government seems about being able to face US tariffs. How much does the Chinese people agree to that? Can they take the pain? What do Chinese academicians think about it? And what does it say about China's governance? Thank you.
I will ask the last question. So, since yesterday we have been talking about tech and innovation, there is one thing that if I have missed, and please pardon me, but if I haven't, then we haven't talked about the startup industry, the tech startup industry, and when I was in 2019, like 𝐕𝐞𝐳 was one of the AI and tech startup. So when we talk about the local fiscal, the situation in the local fiscal development, and then the problem with the local government's investment towards the innovation. So how does the whole startup industry, the tech startup industry is in terms of China's innovation and technology development is going right now?
We are combining all questions, then panel will
So I've
respond.
got two questions. First is for Prof. Venkat. Well, when we talk about how China has a stronghold on the rare earth industry, so to speak, the exports, there is also the fact that Africa is an undeveloped, it's a region where there is huge amounts of potential for rare earth metals, and my question is how that's going to play out further in this whole race of the rare earth metals. Second is how it always seems like India is always on the precipice of making huge discoveries in rare earth metals, be it in the north or be it in, say, Chhattisgarh. There's always surveys again and again, and we always get reports of, oh, we're gonna get this $1 trillion of lithium or these $1 trillion of neodymium, but it never really comes to fruition, right? And then the third, in the same vein, since Trump has taken the decision, well, it is more so a desecration of their values, the American values, that they're going to now drill the national parks and all of their protected sanctuaries. They are definitely going to come up with more rare earth metals to, say, export or to use for themselves. So how do you think these three regions, the Africas, the Indian subcontinent, and the US post, desecration of the national parks, how is that going to come together to change the landscape of rare earth metals? My second question is for Pranay. May I ask that right now? Or?
Thank you. On behalf of Venkat, I'll apply a little now. So we are running out of time. So I'll request panelists to respond in the reverse order. So we'll start with Antara, then Pranay, then Venkat.
Okay, so the two questions, I think both the questions are somehow linked, The dual circulation that they talked about. So I see a clear lack of coordination between the foreign cycle and the domestic cycle. Like I mentioned, made in China is doing very well outside. The foreign cycle is doing very well, but then the domestic cycle is again not working as much. Same in case of industrial robots. Again, there is this contradiction playing out. There is huge focus on high-end manufacturing, competing with the United States in terms of technology. But at the domestic side, it is worsening the employment scenario. So this is actually what I was trying to say that, a lack of coordination between the domestic cycle and the foreign cycle.
First to 𝐂𝐡𝐘𝐧𝐚'𝐬's question, the costs are rising, and the cost earlier the whole point was none of this was possible because China was underpricing all of this, right? Just the fact that now if the cost rises, it becomes incentivized not just for an either or someone, for everyone in the world to invest in it. An example of this is not rare earth, but when gallium restrictions were put by China, prices went up, and there were other suppliers who tried to develop, right? Because then it becomes lucrative for you to do. Otherwise, why would you do that? And the second part to this question is, as I said, the cost increase, at least for the rare earth element, is not significant for OEM, right? It is they are willing to give to absorb. That if 200 rupees becomes 600, they can absorb. But the third point is NCMM has come in, so National Critical Mineral Mission. Now there is a recycling incentive for that segment of the supply chain also, right? So all those three are going to change the dynamics. Prices might rise a bit, but that's the cost businesses will now have to manage, because it's sure that this will happen again, right? So they'll also try to do stockpiling, others try to manage, because again the amounts required are not there. I mean, in our perception we think rare earths are required, that means so much of it is required, but that's not really the case in many elements. It's the same for the answer to your question also. A lot of it is, one answer is in the short term stockpiling. Unlike oil, you can stockpile this for a longer period of time. Second,
where will you source if Chinese are not supplying?
There are other suppliers who will have. It's not only China which has. Second, many of these, it's not again that one particular samarium, if it doesn't exist, it will take time, but you can develop alternatives. See, all of these have specific properties, and those properties, if you replace it with another rare earth, it's not as if all those properties go away. Some of the your motor will be heavier probably, so you will have to manage. Okay, since the motor is heavier, what do you do? Because your magnet is heavier, right? Those kinds of trade-offs will have to be made in your processing entire supply chain idea. But that doesn't mean these are irreplaceable. There are alternatives which always exist. It is about optimization, right? There are other motors also which exist. We had motors before ours also. There was one point you would briefly mention. I'll just address that. IEA estimates, you said, right, lithium, it has been discovered, etc. That particular block which was discovered has not yet been sold even, right? It was in the news that we discovered, but so going broadly, mining itself, the time from discovery to final actual economic extraction, IEA estimates are 16.5 years. That's the amount of time it takes, right? So mining it takes a lot of time, but you have other places like in India, when we are talking about neodymium exists in monazite sands. That was not possible to extract because it came under the Department of Atomic Energy, because the monazite sands are also critical for the three-stage nuclear cycle. That has changed now. Since 2023, now private players apart from IREL are allowed to extract that. So those kinds of things are something which is changing and was not possible earlier.
Yeah, I think the thing is, as far as Africa is concerned, given the African vulnerabilities and the way China has made deep penetration there, even if Africa has those resources, just like now, maybe new places where you will have raw material, rare earth materials, elements, they might get exported to China, thanks to the inroads that something like BRI has made. But India and US, it's not enough if you are able to discover what about the processing. So China has mastered that art, as I said. So that's going to take a lot of time. I think that's what he answered. Are the Chinese happy? They are not. Can they do anything about it? No. They don't have any choice, do they? The only way they can expressed their disappointment is, by saving more and continuing to, not respond to any calls of the government to, help the government in reviving domestic demand in any way. So no matter what the government says, they are going to continue to save. And so therefore, increasingly, even if people have resources, given the way there has been a huge trust deficit because of the real estate crisis there, people are not willing to put their money anywhere. So that's where we are. What can they do? That's a country where you are not even allowed to protest after you have paid your money for a house which you have, which you are entitled to. So what can you do? That's a problem.
Well, we have run out, I think, exactly time. We started 5 minutes late, so Venkat shouldn't be too unhappy about it. I will not make any closing remarks. I will not try to summarize because we had very rich discussions. Only thing, one point I would like to make that Chinese appear to be overly obsessed with technology. Conversely, India is our obsession underwhelming. We don't seem to be really focused on the need for innovation, technology. So perhaps we have to improve our act there. Well, let's thank 3 panelists for insights they have provided, their excellent presentations. So join me in giving them a big hand.
So it's time to, present mementos to the panelists, and for a change, I would include myself in that list. I would call, 2 people to the stage to do the honors, Raghu and Ravi both. Both of us. Ankara, please. Center में जरा जाइए. Maybe just be here for the group. Now, convener of the conference.
Should I be much bigger?